This is Help, I'm a Contractor podcast. Hi, I'm Seth Lewis. I am a blue-collar business coach. Finally, someone that understands what contractors actually go through. My goal and vision is to connect business owners with knowledge while tackling some of the industry's toughest challenges. Please subscribe to my content and let's support each other to create awareness for our industry. Check out what I have going on at www.bluecollarbusinesscoach.net. Check out my book that has helped business owners across the country change their business and their life. But for now, it's time for the show. Let's get it. Today on the show, I have Matt DiBara, aka the Undercover Contractor, who is a fourth-generation owner of DiBara Masonry, one of the leading masonry and concrete companies in LA County. Matt has been working in the industry for more than 20 years, and today his true passion rests in educating homeowners by teaching his Confident Homeowner system. This empowers them with in-depth industry insight and how to find, vet, and hire the right contractors for every job. That can be seen and heard on his podcast, The Confident Homeowner, and currently has a book and TV series in the works for 2022. This is going to be a good one. I can't wait to have him on the show. So let's bring him on. Welcome to the show, Matt. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent, Seth. I'm doing excellent. Thank you.
Man, it's great to have you. You have a lot of experience. I love the podcast, The Undercover Contractor, some of the stuff you're involved in. Just tell us a little bit more who you are, where you're from, what some of your passions are to get started.
Well, I'm a great guy in the contracting world. I'm horrible at cocktail parties because I really only know a few things. My background really is understanding the homeowner space. My dad, not many people know this, but my dad got screwed over by a builder growing up, and it had a huge impact on how I viewed, construction, because he was a police officer and a contractor during the day, and he had one day a week that I got to spend with him. And those days were fixing up this dream home, right? Parenthetical dream home. That was a nightmare. So it had a big impact on me. And my big thing was, how can I help homeowners? Being a fourth generation contractor, started when I was 9 years old. And then I also have a good understanding of the contracting space and some of just the specific struggles being in a fourth generation business for 102 years. And so those are my big two passions right now, is where can I give back in those two areas?
That's awesome. That's so important. Tell me a little bit more about, what you do with homeowners in this Confident Homeowner system. I mean, obviously you have a lot of background in construction. So where did this idea come from?
I went away, actually. No, it's a little more complicated than that. I got obsessed with, I remembered obviously the struggles that my dad had. But by and large in my childhood, I felt like contractors were in a good light. 25 years ago, I don't think it was as bad as it is today in terms of, the scams and the things that can happen. And so I just became obsessed with what really changed over the last 20 to 25 years for me. What happened in the industry? Why is it? Because my best memories as a child were, on the site with my dad working with homeowners. And so I was obsessed with what happened. And I think there's a lot of factors. We can get into some, any, or maybe none. But at the end of the day, the big piece here was I wanted to empower homeowners with a way to find good contractors, because I am a contractor, right? So there are so many good ones out there. It really bugged me that, hardworking men and women, in this space were perceived because of what by and large is more bad apples than we want, right? But it's not the whole pie. And that drove me nuts. And I took the 5,000 appointments that I had calculated that I had been on in my life, and I started to reverse engineer patterns of, how did homeowners end up in lawsuits and what happened? And that's how I came up with the Confident Homeowner system.
So when you looked at everything that happens with a homeowner and a contractor, what did you see? What was that experience like that you were trying to improve?
Well, I was trying to improve and that's why I called it the Confident Homeowner system. I remember one of the things I'm most proud of with DiBara Masonry here in Los Angeles is when clients hire us, they're confident, they're excited, and they're excited the whole way through. And I've realized that there's lack of confidence even from clients who sign the bid, or excuse me, sign the contract, receive a bid, right up until they start doing work. And it baffled me as to why, even after you sign with a contractor, you're still worried that, are they going to show up? Are they going to do what they say they're going to do? They said we didn't need permits, but did we actually not need permits? It's this edginess that's in the air. I mean, to revert back, I literally was the guy. My dad would be like, "Hey, Matt, hit this spot in the driveway a little more," and we would stamp the family's fingerprints in the concrete. So you have to imagine, as a kid, I'm looking at it and going, then a kid, now an adult, I'm looking at it and going, what happened? It went from, troweling concrete and stamping kids' names, in the driveways, to people don't trust the person that's in their home even after they've signed with them. Like, where did this all, what went wrong?
When you think about that, in your opinion, what did go wrong? What changed?
There's so many factors. I've kind of reverse engineered a lot of them. One of them is the fact that a lot of people are retiring. I think 2008 pushed out a lot of good skilled companies that are like, what, I'm in my late 40s, 50s, maybe late 50s. I'm good. I'm going to retire. I don't need to go through another one of these. I know a lot of people that did that. I think, online market made it very easy for companies to pop up out of nowhere and represent themselves, sometimes even better than companies who had been established and maybe still didn't catch up as much in the digital world. I think the amount of money to be made, or perceived money, is a big portion. There's a lot of lead generating sites that sometimes could favor companies that spend money versus companies that get good traffic or good reviews. So there's really, it's a plethora of things. But I remember when advertising was just the yellow pages and we'd meet with them once a year. My dad and I would go to a pizza shop. So I've seen such a shift from that to websites, and it's a lot of factors, to be honest. I think a lack of awareness as a whole as to how much is at risk and how prevalent it is. There's a disconnect, right? It's one of those things where it's almost like a bad car accident. It can never happen to me until it does. But construction is much worse because number 2 on top 2020 consumer complaints, number 2, construction complaints. Second most expensive purchase the average American makes after they buy their home is the maintenance and improvement of their home. So you've got 2 huge issues here. You got a lot of money at stake and you got a lot of problems. And I don't know that we're looking enough at the question you just asked, which is what went wrong and how do we fix it?
So when you think about a customer or homeowner, we'll look at it from 2 sides. So for the customer point of view, what do they need to know and what should they be really looking at to make sure that they avoid these risks?
That was the basis for the Confident Homeowner system. Was I looked at it and I said, okay, the first thing I see is I see a lot of homeowners that are jumbling everything up, meaning they're like online looking for contractors, or what I call building your find list, and at the same time they're reviewing contracts for people they think they might sign with. And so there's this, like, it's so hard to keep track of things when it's not systemized. So that's why I broke it into 4 components. You got to find them, build your list, vet them, cross them off your list, hire them, which is sign the contract, and manage them means what do you do when they don't show up? That's simplified. So I wanted homeowners to have a way where they could do things in chunks, right? It's like folding all your laundry versus like, okay, I'm going to fold 2 socks and then I'm going to go over here and cook dinner. Then I'm going to fold a shirt. It's like that gets very tiring and taxing. And then we just talk about some of the things that I found to be really successful, which is, how to work a referral base, meaning, your friends and family, how to ask them who they've used, but most importantly, how to qualify those referrals. Naming your project is so important. If you ask any contractor, what's the difference between a repair versus a restoration versus a renovation? All these words mean different things to us, but to the client, sometimes they have no idea. I've had historical projects where they're like, I want to repair this. And I'm like, no, you want to restore it. This is a historical restoration. They're like, oh, so there's so much that I looked at throughout this entire process that I thought if we could make a minor improvement here, a minor improvement there, you end up with this very well thought out system that ultimately puts the homeowner at an even kind of playing field with the contractor who, if they're ethical, will love it.
Absolutely. It's so important. So you said the word vet. How does somebody vet a contractor?
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of ways that we cover in the book, but you know, it comes down to a couple of things high level, right? There's obviously the license number. You know, I tell homeowners to look at the about story. The origin story is really important. Ways to look at photos and work. There's a whole process for the questions you ask when you call them up on the phone. The vetting process starts when you go to schedule a bid. So we have in the book even asking whoever answers the phone, you know, what type of work they specialize in, getting an idea of how much of that specific type of work they do. Because one of the big things that I found is that it's kind of like the restaurant that cooks, you know, this meal once a week versus 100 times every day. Contractors offer a lot of services, but some account for a majority of what they're doing, and some are like, well, when I get it once every couple of weeks, I can do it, but it's not my bread and butter. And so helping homeowners find that out in the beginning stages is even just one little advantage point that they have throughout the process. I mean, there's, you know, there's so many different ways we cover.
On the contractor side, you know, when you flip that around, what should a contractor be doing to let them know that they are a, you know, vetted company or somebody that has the experience?
Yeah, I think it starts with a clear understanding of your brand and an honest audit of your business. I know a lot of contractors, and you know, I'm sure we were there at one point, you know, with my dad and my grandfather, where you kind of, when you're owner family or smaller, you want to do all these things. My dad was very known for wanting to take on lots of creative projects, but it was hard to build a business around that. So when we went to scale, it was like, you know, hey, Dad, we got to let go of some of these things that, you know, can only be managed by you or me. We need to systemize the business a little more. So having a clear understanding of your brand and what you specialize in, who you are and what you do is really important. And then just being very honest with the marketplace, telling them, look, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. This job's a little small for us, or, you know, this is a little outside of our wheelhouse. Let me refer someone. That honesty and transparency, I think, builds confidence with the customer, the homeowner, because they go, okay, this person's being upfront and letting them know when you're perfect, you know, when you're perfect for that project.
Yeah, that's so important to be able to clearly articulate what you do. And I really like the way that you said, whether it's in the vetting process or whatever, if you can let the homeowner know that this is what you do all the time, big, big, big difference. And when you think about that, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking, you know, it's so true because if you see a contract that has all the services listed on their truck, you know, you really end up seeing that's like, or trailer, whatever, they have all these things. But if you think about those, each one of those words on that truck or trailer or on their building or billboard or flyer or whatever, wherever it is, if you would put a percentage on each one, I think that's an interesting way that we could look at it and say, what percent of each one of these services that you do? And you're going to find that one of them may be 50% of what they do. That contractor is going to be better there. So I'm looking at this in two ways. Is one to say, obviously, I mean, most of this is out to contractors, you know, but if there is a customer listening, they say this is a good way to understand what people are doing. But on the contractor side, it's to say, when somebody's in your sweet spot, I think it's essential to be able to communicate that that's in your wheelhouse. And I don't think contractors always do this the way that they could, to say, you know, this is what we do every day. And that will help you close jobs.
Yeah. One of the biggest regrets I've seen from even really big companies that I have the pleasure of knowing some of the owners, we're talking companies that do 40, $50 million a year and more, was they were baffled at how much they could specialize the marketing and the messaging, how much opportunity there was in a specific service that they just didn't know at a smaller stage. They were like, I thought I had to do you know, all of these different services, but really all I had to do was train somebody on driving an extra 30 or 40 minutes and do the same service. And it made for a much better business that was more scalable, made the clients happier, made, you know, your team happier because they know exactly the type of work they need to do. And it really just helped everyone across the board. So
When you think about, you know, I would call that niching down or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different things. Where have you seen that in maybe your business, or what is the value to other businesses? What other areas does it impact?
I mean, all of it, because you're able to systemize. And I mean, when we did this as a company, I mean, we've done it just we do it every few years. We look at it and we're cutting stuff off the menu. Basically, we're looking at it and saying, what do we do that we're potentially not doing enough of, that we need to just let go. But it affects everything, right? Because it affects your messaging, so you can be more transparent. We're experts at blank. It affects your references and referrals, because you can give a client 50 fresh references or referrals versus maybe 2 or 3 that are 6 months or a year old. It affects your billing and invoicing standardization. It affects your team and your crews. It affects how you order materials. I mean, I was blown away at how it literally impacted almost every area of the business. And it's a huge thing that I recommend any contractor do, is, to your point, is just the percentages, and get real honest, and not be scared to cross a few things off thinking that it's going to be less work. You're not crossing off revenue. You're replacing that inconsistent revenue with something more favorable and easier to fulfill on.
So this is the question. Why is it so difficult to do? What's going on with business owners that want to have the menu that's pages and pages long?
It comes from, in my experience, it comes from a lack of control around your marketing, right? Because they're looking at the current marketing situation and saying, well, yeah, if I crossed off, and I've done this with contractors that I know, over dinner or whatnot, they'll say, well, yeah, if I cross this off, I'm crossing off 20% of my revenue for last year. And it's marketing focus and some money into specific messaging, you can replace that revenue. I think it's a fear of, well, I'm wiping away this revenue in these projects versus reallocation. And it's, believe it or not, I mean, because I've done it, it's a scary thing to do, because you're like, are there really?
Thanks for listening to the show. I specialize in working with contractors and service business owners just like you. If you are your business and you're looking to do less, not more, if you have a great product or service, but deals aren't closing the way that you want, maybe you've grown so much and operationally it's been a mess. Maybe it's gaining back more time, better organization, and reducing stress. You know there's a better way to running your business. It's on you to take the first step. It's time. I can help. Go to www.bluecollarbusinesscoach.net and let's start by mapping out your current business versus what you want.
I mean, because I've done it, it's a scary thing to do, because you're like, are there really enough people who have damaged retaining walls? Are there really enough people who have, cracked pipes around their pool, drain it? Like, it's hard to really understand how many people suffer from the issues until you start honing the marketing.
So when you think about that, I think this is a good thing to explore a little bit so I think people want that. It's really easy to say, I want that. I hear what you're saying. I want it. I like that. It would be great to only have to do X, Y, and Z. I think the messaging part is so key, because what you put out there, you attract. So I want to encourage business owners and people that are worried about this. What you put out there, you're going to attract. So if you want more of that and you put energy into that, you're going to attract the people that need that pipe broken in the funny spot, that you have the solution to, and you've done thousands of times. But take me through a little bit of maybe some of the fear, and obviously the fear is revenue. We stated that. But what's maybe, in your opinion, some simple ways, or a simple way or two, that they can feel confident in this? Because they're feeling like they're erasing the revenue. They're feeling like it's gone, that 20%. How can they continue to work through that to make sure that they get there and just don't go back to it?
Yeah, what I've done in the past is actually kind of, it's easy to do from a place of abundance. And so what I've done is I've actually allocated money to marketing campaigns to validate the number of calls. So if I wanted to do more, we do a lot of complicated structural stuff, retaining walls, hillside work here in Los Angeles. And when we wanted to get more of that work, I launched those campaigns and really went outward on that before cutting it to validate it. And as calls started coming in, as appointments started to be booked, as jobs started to close, I said, okay, there's, this is solid ground. It's not theory or concept. There's really a foundation here. I think there's nothing better than a place of abundance for contractors. I know that the scariest thing, and I'll speak for me, but I bet you anybody listening will relate, is when your phone's not ringing or when you're concerned about it. Yeah, and the biggest thing there is really focusing on, creating that abundance, finding more leads within the service that you want to generate more of, right? You want that to be more of your revenue, because it gets you out of scarcity. One of the biggest fears that I know most contractors share, I've been guilty of this at times, is if the phone's not ringing or you feel like you don't have enough work, it feels like almost like a cataclysmic failure waiting to happen, because especially in this day and age where somebody's ready and willing to take your team, your team is probably not going to sit around waiting for you to find more work. So it's a little bit more tied to the system, as contractors might look at it, right? I got to find enough work. I got to process that work. I got to make sure I can keep my team busy. So it's not just losing revenue, cash flow, and keeping your team.
You mentioned abundance and scarcity, buzzwords in the community of like coaching and some of the mindset stuff. But in the contractor world, some people are aware of that, some people are not. So if you could just kind of give a real basic thought to when you say abundance, what do you mean? And how do you live in that space?
So I've read a lot. I've read a lot of those books, right? But really, what we're talking about is an energy and a mindset of it's plentiful. There's a lot of it, and looking for ways to test and validate that. So I types of jobs, and then we started the marketing campaigns to look for that validation.
Yeah. So another thing that I think of when I think of that, a simple way to relay it to contractors sometimes is, and I would challenge you to do this, but call up your competitor and see how you can share ideas, because that is like the ultimate challenge of, do you really, or could you, or can you have an abundance mindset or versus a scarcity mindset? So scarcity is going to tell you that, if I give a secret to my competitor, we share something, and maybe it's not your secrets, and maybe it doesn't have to be somebody that your arch enemy or whatever, because that rubs everybody. I mean, I can feel people's blood boiling right now. They're probably like angry or something. But the idea is, can you communicate with that person and have an idea and a mindset to say, there's enough work out there for both of us, and if we would work together, what would that create? And I think people would be surprised by doing that, but that is difficult. I mean, that is really, really difficult. So, but we live in this thing that says, hey, I need to keep it for myself, and I can't share anything to the guy down the street, or I'll lose it from myself. So that's a challenge, maybe a simple way to think about it, but that's tough. That not ain't easy for anybody.
Yeah, and I also try and look for other examples to almost play mind games, right? So I look at all the burger restaurants, all the fast food chains or restaurants, and I think, wow, how can two burger restaurants, or fast food chains be across the street from one another, and still have enough business? Or how is it that you can have 3 or 4 mattress stores in some cities, but you look at these ways in which you can almost validate your thought process. There's a company out here that does sump pump repair, right? I'm in Los Angeles, so it hardly ever rains here. And I'm, and there's quite a few, there's one main one, but there's a few others, and thinking that's all they do is repair sump pumps. And they have a huge operation. They've got 30 employees, they're shipping. It's like, and so you can also do research to where you're like, this can't be, this can't be real. And then you do the research, or you call them up, or you go in there and you're like, looking around and you're like, there's thousands of, they got a warehouse, and I peeked back there and I'm like, you have thousands of these pumps being repaired. Like, the abundance mindset is just, it's a powerful thing when you anchor it with something you think consciously or logically can't be true. And then you prove to yourself by seeing it, oh, wow, actually there is, a demand for that, or pool cover, just crazy businesses that you're like, there's no way somebody could have a multi 7-figure business doing blank. And then you find out, oh, actually they do.
That's awesome. That's a great example. I love the way that you can tie another example to that. One of the things that you mentioned that you're passionate about as well is, setting up people for success, constantly recruiting and just developing and people. So tell me a little bit more about, where that came from, what you do, what are some of your passions around that? Maybe how have you done it?
Yeah, the passion came from seeing my dad struggle as a kid, growing his business. I saw what would happen if he would leave, and I was young at the time, in the early days, and so they didn't, the crews didn't always take me as serious as they did when I got older. And my dad would always get phone calls, or he struggled to build a business that could rely without him. And so we had certain crews with foremen that would run the job, and it would be like my dad didn't need to be there, and other crews where the minute he left, it was like they were calling, texting, he was working 24/7, it felt like. And so I started, and going back to the abundance mindset, my dad had a lot of kind of thoughts. He's like, nobody's going to work as hard as family, and nobody cares about the business. And I grew up in that mindset, that ideology. It's impossible to find people that just some of the common stuff that you might hear in construction, especially if you grew up in it. And look, and there would be companies with 200 employees, 500 employees in this, a similar, if not the same industry. And I'm like, I would ask myself, how is it that this company has 500 employees and we're struggling to keep our, 12 or 15 or 20 kind of really well organized and a well-oiled machine? And so then it was really the identification of, there is abundance here. I can see it, right? Because that's how my mind works. I got to make it real. I got to find an example. And then, later in life, when I took over the business and grew it, it was about becoming obsessed with, how do we find people that are going to join our team, our family, and work as hard as we do? And more importantly, placing an emphasis on, number one, this has to happen. It's not tolerable to have anything less than this. So the first thing I did is set a standard. I said, every crew is going to be, self-sustaining. They're going to be passionate, and they're going to care as much as we do. They're going to take pictures of their work. They're going to go above and beyond for the client. They're going to clean up at the end of the day like I would if I were on that job. And I said, like I mentioned, first I make it real, then I set a standard. I'm like, we're now going to do this. And the last three years or so, 3 to 4 years have been about, hundreds of thousands of dollars in experimenting with different ways to recruit, and trialing all these different methods to find out, what is it that, the big companies do? What is it that the small business did? What works for us? And putting that all together into kind of a package, a system, if you will, that works to find people in what is probably the hardest.
One of the things that I think is interesting, and I'm sure this popped off in some people's heads, is to say, okay, if you're the owner and you have a couple people, there's a huge, and I talk to people across the country all the time, and that's a real theme. Nobody's going to work as hard as me. I'm the owner. I'm not going to find anybody. So I really would like to just get a couple of your insights on, when you set a standard, how'd you do that? And, how was it received? And then how are you ensuring that they're doing that? Because that's a common thing, way of thinking, a thought process. And most people can never get past that thought right there.
Well, I believed it was possible. I genuinely believed I could find those people before I had any proof. Just because I had seen, I saw these other companies. And then I just started dissecting, and any contractor listening can do this. I started looking at, well, what are some of the common traits that I have? I show up early, I stay late, I've got this get the job done mentality. And I'll give you a tangible example. When I would interview, so one of the things I did is I allocated a lot more of my time, specifically me, in hiring and finding the right people. So it wasn't a small part of what I was doing. It was like, this is the thing that I'm doing. So I took it seriously. That was the first big piece, or one of them. But a specific example of this is what I would do is I would take photos of my work. So at the end of every job, when I was in the fields, one of the most fulfilling things for me was to take photos, and my dad and I would talk about the jobs, and I'd show him pictures, and I was always very proud. And so one of my interview techniques is, when I would be doing the, semifinal or final interview, is I would ask them, I'd say, do you have any pictures of your work that you mind sharing? And I could tell based on that reaction, it was a behavioral. I could tell based on that reaction of, oh my gosh, yeah, awesome. And they'd scroll through it, right? Because I can't tell you the amount of people who would sit in an interview and say, I'm so passionate, I love this stuff, I everything that we're looking for. But I would root it in that behavioral, and I'd say, great, can I look at some photos? And the people we hired, bar none, the ones that we hired and that stayed, have phones full of their photos. I mean, you could scroll back years, and they're like, I did this fireplace, and I built this wall, and I did this. And, and then I'd look for that excitement. And so it was about understanding, what are the traits that I'm genuinely looking for, a clear understanding of that, and then coming up with some behaviorals that, that would work. And another one is punctuality. I would do something where, for example, if the position was something that had to do with good communication, we have a position where, we pick up materials. It's a runner, essentially a runner position, very communication and being prompt. So for that interview, I would answer the call and say, hold on one second, can you call me back in 9 minutes? And I hang up the phone. And then I would wait and see if they call me back in 9 minutes. And by and large, the people that that would end up sticking in the role and doing well were the ones who called in 8 or 9 minutes, not 15 minutes, not 12 minutes, 9 minutes. So, that's just one specific kind of nugget that anybody listening can use, is, what are the behaviorals that make you specifically great, rather. And then how can you find those in the people that you're looking to hire? And just being honest with yourself. I mean, communication and promptness are really important to me, and especially in certain roles. And I didn't say 11 minutes is good enough. I said 9 minutes. And, that goes back to setting that standard.
Yeah, I think that's great, because one of the things people and owners really get caught up in is like the perfect questions, or like how to screen with an interview. Because most times people are so desperate for work or labor or whatever it may be, they just bring anybody in. We've all been there, where you say, can you start yesterday, today, tomorrow? Like, what, if you're breathing and you can come in, like, we're good. So obviously you have to shift away from that at some point. That doesn't work long-term sustainable. So, we learned how to do better things. But I think what's key to what you said there is, there's some simple things. So being punctual, being able to say 9 minutes, having a simple routine that you can gauge the key areas. So I think people, like, a lot of times owners will have like ask some questions, but they're really not directed at anything. You could ask 3 questions and have a much better hire than somebody that sits down and asks 30, 40 questions with no point behind it. I really like, the examples that you had of the picture. If you have somebody, a craftsman, somebody that loves to do work and is proud of it, and you're really looking for somebody that's detail oriented and proud of their work, what better way to say, hey, do you have any pictures? Because that person is going to have pictures. It's proven. Those 2 things probably have changed your business right now. If you're listening, if you would do those 2 things, and you're in, a remodeling or some type of service business like that, change the game.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think makes me unique, Seth, is, and I say the word unique very humbly, is that growing up in school, I struggled to learn. I was the last kid to learn my ABCs, and I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but what I think makes me unique in this space is my ability to, I had to simplify things because I couldn't understand complicated stuff. I don't know how to, like, it just, my way of learning things had to be more, I'm like, there has to be a simpler way. I would ask people when we were really starting to grow the business, what's the best hiring methods and how do you, and I'm like, you need a whiteboard and you need 2 hours to understand it. And I'm like, no, there has to be an easier way. And I think you're touching on that. I mean, just, it was common sense things. And there's so many, I don't want to undermine the hiring because, we're working on a full kind of course that we're putting together on this. So there's a lot of elements to being able to confidently hire in the construction industry, but a fair amount of these things, like you said, the lift can come from just something as simple as saying, what are a few things, if I were going to interview me, what would be the things that I would love about myself? Right? Like it's really that simple. That's what I asked. I'd be there early. I wouldn't be phony. I wouldn't, I wouldn't like for me personally, I wouldn't overdress. I would dress as I normally would. Especially when I was in the field. It's I wouldn't say easier, but I would say it's simple things that will give you these big improvements, not always complicated.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like your story around simplicity and how, you had to do that, but that's actually became and has become, could be one of arguably your greatest assets in your organization because people can understand what they need to do. And, I really love that. And I would encourage any contractor to try to simplify because we overcomplicate things way too much. And people can't understand it. When they can do it. So I really love that. Tell me a little bit about maybe the book or the TV series that's coming up. Anything you want to share there?
Yeah, I mean, the book's mainly geared towards homeowners. I think, it'd be a great read for contractors just because I think that you could, like you said, reverse engineer some of these things. We'll finish this book up in about another month and a half, 2 months, but the book is really, I wanted any contractor that's ethical to be excited because this is like a big, beautiful spotlight on your company. And if you're doing the right things and you have the best interest of the homeowner in mind, you're going to love it because they're just going to know more about you. Like it's almost like being an extremely well received. I mean, I'll give you the example of an actor, right? And this person's just going, things you've done. It's like, getting straight A's on a report card. The book establishes the report card. And if you're doing the right things, you'll get straight A's and you'll love it. For the people that are not so ethical, it's going to be a bumpy ride. But I think it's one that needs to be had because, us as contractors, it's time to make sure we're weeding out some of the people that potentially don't need to be, or shouldn't be in this industry if they're in it for the wrong reasons.
I think that's terrific. I love your energy, in the blue collar industry, the excitement, the confidence, your willingness to give back and share things. I think that's so important in what you're doing. I love the way that you simplify things. I mean, I think that's so good for your, sharing and something like this to your actually crews, your teams, family, life, everything. It's important to be simple and clear. So I think that's really, terrific with what you're doing. Just a couple, quick fire things, to, wrap it up. Contractors would be better if blank.
I love that. Contractors would be better if they clearly outlined what they genuinely want.
Biggest challenge?
Outlining what you genuinely want. No. I think, knowing what thing to focus on. knowing what in that moment, in that narrow window of time, what to invest your time in, I think is probably the hardest part.
Last thing you got on Amazon?
Last thing I got on Amazon. What did I buy on Amazon? Oh, diapers. I got a 14-day-old.
Awesome. Congrats.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Favorite brand of tools?
Ooh, this is gonna divide some people. I mean, generally speaking, I'm a Makita guy. Generally speaking, and then masonry specific. If there's masonry contractors or concrete, I'm a Rose guy.
Okay. All right. Ford or Chevy?
Oh man, that's a good question. Let's do. I would say.
Or if you have another one.
Forward.
All right. Cabin or beach house?
Beach house.
I want other contractors and owners to know what?
That having a business that you get to work in the areas that only you want is achievable.
I love that. That's so important. I really want to thank you for coming on the show today, Matt. I mean, great tips, great advice. The goal of the show is, if one person can get better from this, that's what it's about. I think there was clear, simple, deliverable, actions to take. So I really appreciate your time being on the show and your insights.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I love this stuff. So I really do appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening. Like and share with other contractors. Start studying